Hey there, friends and running fans. This is Amby Burfoot with my co-host, George Hirsch, bringing you the latest episode of our podcast, Running State of the Sports. This week, our special guest is Jack Fultz, who's celebrating a big anniversary this April at the Boston Marathon. It's 50 years since he won that classic race in 1976.
And this is George Hirsch. Indeed, Jack won Boston in the famous Run for the Hoses marathon. If you don't understand what that means, it's a reference to the scorching temperatures that day in Boston, the highest ever in Boston marathon history. And we're talking 129 years of history. In a moment, we'll ask Jack exactly how hot it was that day and what he remembers most about the race. He won in 2:20 that day in Boston, but 2 years later returned to show the world what an elite marathoner he really was.
For the last several decades, Jack has served as coach of the huge and inspirational Dana Farber marathon team. He trains these charity runners and also calms their anxious minds with a deep and a very specific knowledge of how to run your best on that tough Boston course. We'll be sure to ask Jack about his Boston wisdom.
But first, let's briefly review the biggest recent news in running. What have you been paying attention to, Amby?
George, the Los Angeles Marathon doesn't get talked about a lot, but it's been surprising the last 2 years. Last year, a largely unknown American named Matt Richtman won Los Angeles in a sensational time, 2:07:56, and he's been mostly invisible since then. This year, another American won, but it was weird. Nathan Martin won by a fraction of a second in what is believed to be the first major marathon victory by an American-born black athlete. The problem is, Martin shouldn't have won. He didn't do anything wrong, but somehow marathon officials let a crazed fan onto the course in the final stretch, and she interfered with the then leader, Kenyan Michael Kimani Kamau. That caused Kamau to turn the wrong way and lose several seconds. In my opinion, the LA officials should acknowledge their poor crowd control and offer Kamau prize money equal to what Martin received. I haven't heard that they've made this offer, however, but I hope they do. Also, in another big marathon in Barcelona, Ethiopian Fultz Tesfaye ran the second fastest marathon of all time, 2:10:51, behind only Ruth Chepngetich's highly suspect 2:09:56. People might be surprised, but I actually believe more in Tesfaye than in Chepngetich, because Tesfaye is still on the improvement arc of her career, where Chepngetich was clearly past her prime. My question is, why does everyone run so fast in Barcelona? First, Jacob Kiplimo ran that 56:42 a year ago, a time that wasn't accepted by World Athletics due to a pace car issue, and now we have this sensational time. I want to know, what's in the drinking water in Barcelona, George? And I'm wondering maybe a few other things too, like who's measuring those courses? The World Championships just finished, the indoor championships in Poland. All the distance races were pretty exciting, I thought. In the 3,000-meter events, the big one was the matchup between Great Britain's Josh Kerr and the U.S.'s Cole Hocker. They've become real rivals, and this time, Kerr took the title with a perfectly timed race, with Hocker second. This is a big rivalry that's only getting bigger, and we can't wait until Jakob Ingebrigtsen is back with them also. George, you were at the New York City Half Marathon. What else have you been paying attention to?
Well, first, that half marathon, it was a great event, Amby. Really ideal conditions, 30,000 finishers. And Helen O'Beary, she was the star of the show. 106:33, a course record for this Boston and New York champion. And you said it was a stacked field. And, she beat the likes of Sharon Lokedi, another New York City Marathon champion, Adrian Wildschut from South Africa, first South African to win the New York City Half in a very respectable 59:30 on, what we know is a challenging course. All eyes were on Grant Fisher, who's been this track sensation. He won 2 medals at the Paris Olympics, and here he was doing something quite new and different, taking to the roads, running his first ever half marathon. I suspect that Grant was not entirely pleased with his 14th place finish in 1 hour and 53 seconds. But, you and I are going to talk to him soon, and, we'll chat with him about his venture into road running. But it was great to have Grant out there with that elite field. And as you said, the World Indoor Championships, there were some really terrific races, Amby, but, there's just one that stuck in my mind before I get to it. Keely Hutchinson, she's just been the dominant 800-meter runner, and she ran away with her race in a world championship record of 155.30. I mean, super impressive. But it was the men's 800. My gosh, you and I have already been talking about Cooper Lukenhaus, who now has turned 17. He was 16. Exactly. He was 16 when he kind of captured the attention of the world of running, this Texas high schooler. And here he was in the world championships indoors and running with poise and confidence. He looked great and getting into the final. And then he controlled the race in the final, took the lead, and had the wherewithal and, of course, the leg speed to hang on in 1:44.24. Not only the youngest gold medalist in world championship history, the youngest individual medalist. I mean, what can we say? I mean, how do we even, where do we talk about him? I guess for you and me, who've been around a long time, names like Jim Ryan and Mary Decker Slaney certainly come to mind as people who were spectacular when they were very, very young and then went on to incredible careers. But what this guy's got ahead of him, Amby, I'll tell you, it's just, it's going to be fun for us, to watch him. So that's it. I could go through lots of other stuff, but I think it's Cooper that I really want to talk about. So that was it.
Well, we're not the only ones fascinated by Cooper Lukenhaus. Obviously, just about everyone in the neighborhood is predicting he's going to set a world record in the 800 in the next year or two. You can never count on that from the young kids, but boy, is he a big, strong, fast, smart-looking runner. And also, people are saying Keely Hutchinson's got a chance at the world record in the 800 this summer. That one's been around for a long, long time. Because of the likely doping of these Eastern runners 3 decades ago. But Keely looks like she's got a shot at it too. So the 800 is going to be a big event for the next couple of years with lots of great competitors. Thanks for those notes from New York, George, and that's it for our roundup of the biggest recent news in running. Now let's turn to Jack Fultz, this week's guest at Running State of the Sport. As we noted in our introduction, Jack is celebrating a very special anniversary this year at the Boston Marathon. It's 50 years since his Boston victory in 1976, in the infamous hottest Boston Marathon day ever.
Indeed, the 1976 Boston became known as the Run for the Hoses, because that's what all the runners were doing as they sought cooling sprays along the course. For most of the last 30 years, Jack served as coach of the massive Dana Farber charity team at Boston, teaching sometimes inexperienced charity runners how to train for and run the infamously challenging Boston course. His runners have achieved a finish success rate of 95%. Quite impressive.
Jack, welcome to the Running State of the Sport podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks, Amby, and thanks, George, very much for that kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with you both today.
So, Jack, let's get started with some brief bio details, your current, situation, how old you are, where you're living, wife, family, how do you fill your days after the morning alarm clock goes off?
Alrighty. Well, my bladder tends to be my alarm clock these days, but I jokingly say with regards to how old I am, I say I'm old enough to know better, but I don't. I'm actually 77 years old now, years young. I live in Lincoln, Massachusetts. I was lucky enough to discover Lincoln when I first moved up here to the Boston area back in '79. Actually, I moved up here to go into business with Bill Rogers, or at least go to work for him. But I needed some skin in the game if I was going to wear his initials on my singlet. So the business had never materialized. Bill and I are still very good friends. And I live. Lincoln is just west of Boston, a small suburb, kind of nestled in the heat of the American Revolution between Concord and Lexington, Mass. So we have all that. I am married to Jan Ross. We have no children, none that I know of. And every day for me is filled with events that to keep my to-do list far fuller than anything I have time to keep up with. I'm still training advisor for, also known as the coach, of course, for the Dana Farber Marathon Challenge Institute's running teams. We have 500 runners on our marathon team. We have more than that in the Boston Half Marathon team in the fall that Dana Farber actually sponsors. We have 300 runners on the Falmouth Road Race team and small teams in all the other World Marathon majors except for London. So I'm kind of busy throughout the year taking care of all of those runners, doing online training, of course, and answering their training-related and injury-related questions. I still coach a few individuals as well. And the rest of my days are kind of filled out with a lot of various activities. My own workouts, of course. I can't run anymore. I tore my knee up rehabbing my replaced hip. The hip's fine, the knee is not, so I shuffle and power walk. That's the extent of that. But I still bike a lot, and that's my primary focus. I head to the health club, a couple times a week. I cut, split, stack firewood pretty much throughout the year because we burn firewood throughout the winter here. And I'm constantly replying to emails. I have a morbid curiosity for the national and global political scene, so I keep my eyes on that. I do a lot of Audible books. So I'm keeping myself very busy.
That sounds like a very full schedule, Jack. Let's cut straight back to the 1976 Boston Marathon. You know what's interesting about it? It wasn't your first marathon of the year. You had already run two in 1976 to try to qualify for the Olympic marathon trials. Both went pretty badly because of miserable winter weather. Then you arrive in Boston. It's like 90 degrees on Saturday, 90 on Sunday, 90 on Monday. Why did you even bother running?
Well, as you said, my two earlier ill-fated attempts at getting a qualifying time went south on me. Between those two, I had an indoor track season at Georgetown, so I was still speed trained as well as increasing my mileage in preparation for running a marathon to qualify for the trials. So Boston was my third and final option. I didn't want to run Boston because it was only 6 weeks before the trials, but I had run out of options. And because I was on the track and running cross country the 2 years prior to 76 at Georgetown also, I just didn't have the opportunity to run a qualifying marathon the way that all the other American marathoners had done. So I was kind of stuck with that option. And that was my primary goal when I came to run Boston, was to get that qualifying time of a sub 2:20.
So, Jack, what was your strategy for dealing with the heat? What about pacing and fluids? Did you see any actual temperatures while you were actually out on the course? And did you yourself run for the hoses to keep cool? And tell us, did you worry about friction and blisters? I want to get it all in there, wet clothing, shoes. Or did the hoses feel like an absolutely necessary survival mechanism? Give us a sense of it all.
Wow, okay. Well, I had heard that there was a thermometer on top of a service station, a gas station there in Hopkinton, a little bit behind the starting line. It was nestled up on top of a tar paper black roof, I assume, because somebody said it read 116 degrees. Now, we knew it wasn't quite that hot, but
it felt it, though.
It did. That's right. You were there, Amby. So, but the radio reports we were getting that it was in the mid 90s. So, the exact temperature turned out to be 96 at the start, the official temp. But you could see the heat rippling off the pavement as you looked down the starting chute. And so we knew it was hot. But, I had looked at because I needed to get a sub 220 marathon, I looked at the results from the previous year, which was a very fast year. And anything inside the top 10 was going to get me well under a 220 in normal circumstances, normal conditions. I had finished 12th 5 years earlier in my first Boston, so I knew I was going to finish. I was supremely confident I'd finish in the top 10 if nothing went south on me. And I kind of ran the numbers from my track times. I figured I'm probably good for a 214, 215 on a perfect day. So if the heat doesn't cost us any more than 5 minutes, I still get under that 220. And the B standard was 223. So if I made that, I could still go to the trials. I just had to pay my own expenses. And so I stayed as relaxed as if it was a nice, cool day. I still had the confidence I was going to get the qualifying time. I figured it was going to slow all of us down pretty much the same. So I set my sights on the, somewhere inside the top 10. And interestingly enough, there were no, you guys remember, there were no water stops, no check marks, no mileage markers, pretty much no services on the course. It was just all the residents along the course came out with all the garden hoses. But you didn't know where you were on the course vis-a-vis time. So while I was running for a time predominantly, where I placed in the race was not incidental. It was not unimportant to me, but it was secondary to getting my time. So I kind of stacked my priorities up that way. And so it was an interesting conundrum of running for place, but focused on getting the time. But that mindset, interestingly enough, for me, made all my opponents in that race my allies. It's like my teammates. The faster they ran, the faster I was likely to run. And I was there to have them help me run the time I needed. So the dynamic of that, the cognitive dynamic, really eliminated any competition anxiety. They were no longer perceived by me as a threat, like our opponents typically are in a race. So that whole competition aspect and the anxiety that it raises, it's a double-edged sword. Sometimes it often spawns us on to do things we otherwise wouldn't be able to do on our own. But but a lot of people will give reports after a race, that I didn't get everything out of myself I had in me. I went into it, I was a little too nervous, a little too tight, made the wrong strategic move. So none of that happened in that race, and ended up running, for me, the absolute perfect race. I did run for all the hoses. I mean, they were the saving grace of the day, without a doubt. And, I probably ran 26 and a half to 27 miles running into people's yards, running under the garden hoses, showers that they set up on step ladders. And I just took on as much water as I possibly could, stayed as wet and as cool as I could. And again, as I said, I was speed trained because I'd been on the track for two years or more. And so I knew, having run Boston 3 times before, what was necessary to pace yourself appropriately to get pretty even paces. That's the best way to run your best time. And so I had to let the leaders go, but I kept visual contact with them for the most part. But again, I was running almost at my training pace by slowing down so as to not let the heat and the downhills at early Boston, which seduced just about every Boston marathoner to go out too fast. I was extra cautious to not let that happen. And as it turns out, it worked out perfectly. I didn't learn till after the race, but my 2 half marathons were only 17 seconds apart. So I just ran very even pace, and everybody went out too fast, died, and came back to me in groups of 1 or 2 once I get into the top 10 in Wellesley.
Jack, there are very few people on this planet who've had the experience of turning right on Hereford and left on Boylston with a comfortable lead. What was it like to realize you were going to win the Boston Marathon?
Well, that's interesting. I'm again, as I said, I was really focused on my time rather than my place. And as I was moving into 4th place, I was passing Jack Foster, who was the pre-race favorite, one of them. He had set the world record for the Masters Marathon with a 2:11 less than 2 years earlier. He had won Honolulu in a record-setting 2:17, a hot weather marathon, just 4 months earlier. So he was the race favorite. I was passing him going up over Route 128, just past the 16-mile mark, and that's when I moved into fourth place. And that's when it really started hitting me. Oh, I'm really in contention for a possible win here, because I looked up and I could see second and third place runners running together, only another 100 meters ahead of me. And I caught them within the next half to 3/4 of a mile before we made the turn at the firehouse at 17+ mile mark. I ran by them. Billy Squires had run out on the course and handed me some ice. Bill Squires, you guys remember, he was the great coach of the Greater Boston Track Club. Coached Billy Rogers the year before, and the Greater Boston Track Club for a number of years. I only knew of him. I hadn't met him before, but he ran out, handed me all these ice cubes. Here, rub these all over your arms, which I did. And then I had a few left over. I handed them to the two guys I ran past and to run into second place. It was Mario Cuevas from Mexico and Jose de Jesus from Puerto Rico. So they were both coming out of hot weather climates training as well. And by the time I turned to Firehouse, I looked up and all of a sudden there was the lead press bus with the lead runner, Richard Mabuza from Swaziland. He had run 2:12 the year before, so he was another pre-race favorite. So all these guys had come out of hot weather climates. So I had not been on the roads. Nobody knew who I was really, so I was definitely a real surprise. Took the lead there in front of the Brayburn Country Club near the 18-mile mark and ostensibly never looked back, in part because all the runners or all the spectators were yelling, "There's no one behind you," once I broke free. So I didn't have to. But that idea of running right on Hereford, left on Boylston, back then we didn't make a left on Boylston. I made the right on Hereford, ran up that little slope, and you guys remember we ran across Boylston Street, a little angle right, and get across Boylston, and then made a sharp left onto Ring Road, which is the little passageway in front of the Heinz Auditorium. Ran all the way down. It's only about a 200-meter sprint down to the finish line right in front of the Prudential Tower back then. That was the finish line between 65 and 86. And when Hancock came in as the major sponsor in 1986, they moved the finish line down further to the John Hancock Tower rather than the Prudential Tower. And it remains now where it was after 1986. So we finished right there in front of the Prudential Tower.
So, Jack, your Boston time that year was 2:20:19, which got you into the marathon trials, but without expense money. They had two tiers. I think it was an A and a B, and you didn't get the expense money. So how did you do in that year's trials race in Eugene? And we remember that the top three runners then were Frank Shorter, Bill Rogers, and Don Cardone. Tell us about your race.
Well, it was interesting. In terms of the qualifying time, as you said, I missed the A standard by 19 seconds. And despite the oppressive conditions under which I ran that time, the U.S. Olympic Committee wouldn't pay my way. They said, if we made an exception for you, we'd have to make an exception for everybody. I learned much later, either later that year or even the following year, that they had made exceptions for a lot of the runners who qualified for the trials in the 75 Boston Marathon. It was, and a lot of the guys ran PRs in 75 because the conditions were so good. Even Bill Rogers said, no, I can't run that fast, right? It was just a very fast day. And a lot of guys ran under 220 there whose PRs previously had been somewhere in the mid 220s. So then they let all of those guys run the trials, use that as their qualifying time, and yet the qualifying period didn't really begin until June of 75. So anyway, a little bit of the politicking. Regardless, Georgetown paid my way out, and so I had that all covered. The mistake I made was I was so excited after winning Boston, my sense of a possible third spot on that U.S. Olympic team went up, many-fold. We all assumed Rogers and Shorter were going to be the first two guys on the team. Bill had set the American record and course record at Boston the year before. Frank was returning from his win in 72, Munich, and they were both still in the prime of their careers. So if they were healthy and fit, probably no one was going to beat them. So it was kind of a race for third place, at least that it was in my mind. And now having won Boston, I thought, it's a long shot, but I've got a shot. So I went back to Georgetown, recovered, and within 2 weeks, I was starting to bang out workouts again, foolishly. And I hadn't fully recovered, and I just dug myself deeper into the hole. The old saying from Will Rogers, if you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. We marathoners tend not to do that. And so by the time I got to the trials, I was kind of trashed. I ran the race, I finished the race, but I was never really in contention. So, but nonetheless, it launched me on to my running career, which lasted, another goodness knows how many years. My open career for another 3 or 4 or 5 years, and then injury and age started taking its toll back then. So I languished a little bit. Went to local races and whatnot until we turned 40, and because Frank and Bill had turned 40 6 years before I did, all of a sudden there was a lot more attention start to be paid to the Masters division of races. Prior to that, nobody really cared too much about the Masters runners, but that's all changed now. Again, in large part to those guys aging up and then the rest of us following suit. But I was asked once before, would I trade my my Boston victory for a place on the Olympic team, and said, no way. Maybe for an Olympic medal, as Frank Shorter once said. He was asked what he would rather have, what's more valuable, a gold medal at Boston or a gold medal in the Olympics. And he said, well, the Olympic gold tarnishes a little more slowly, perhaps, but otherwise they both have their value and merit.
Well, you're right, Jack. We don't get to make those choices after the fact, do we? No. Very quickly, I'm curious. Let's drop back to childhood, because that's a formative time for everyone. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what your family life was then like, and what sports did you participate in, and how did childhood shape your adult character?
Well, I think for like with all of us, it certainly did. I grew up in small town Franklin, Pennsylvania. It's nestled up in the northwest section of Pennsylvania. We jokingly say the NW stands for nowhere, not Northwest. Mm-hmm. But I'm the youngest. I'm next to youngest of 7 kids. I'm the youngest of 4 boys. All 3 of my older brothers were, when I was growing up, I felt much better athletes than I was. But I played football in the fall. We didn't have cross country. Played basketball in the winter, and basketball is my favorite sport. And of course, I ran track in the spring. And track was I was more successful in track than I was in the other 2 sports. I grew up delivering morning newspapers, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. So I was on my bike for an hour every morning, from Monday through Saturday, from 4th grade through 12th grade. So I was getting an hour-long aerobic workout in every day. I just thought I was delivering newspapers, but this started to show its benefit, certainly when I started running organized track in 8th and 9th grade. But all the way up and then through my high school career, I had some successes on the track, but nothing great until my senior year. And at football camp that fall of my senior year, we actually all the football players, we literally lived in the high school gymnasium for a whole week. We had football camp. That's how serious high school football was in Pennsylvania, still is. But anyway, so we all had to go out at 7:00 in the morning. The entire team had to go out and run a 2-mile loop. And I'd come in a quarter to a half mile ahead of everybody every day, right? So finally the coaches said, okay, Fultz, you're going to run the mile next spring in track rather than the quarter mile we've had you in. So that was kind of the kickoff and the pointing the direction that I'm going to be a distance runner. And I went out and ran on my own during study halls and stuff. I'd go out and run 3 or 4 or 5 miles, which was a bit of anathema to what was going on where I'd grown up. My parents were blue collar. My dad was a blue collar worker. My mother was a waitress. They both carried second jobs. I don't know how they raised and fed and educated all 7 of us. It's absolutely amazing. But they did. And, all this stuff really does shape your adult character, I think. As Johnny Kelly says, he liked to sing young at heart. And I like to think that I still am sort of young at heart, even at 77 years of age. But, it all emanated out of northwestern Pennsylvania, no doubt. My older brothers, as I say, they got into marathoning after I had some success there. They had long since retired from their athletic careers and got back into it. So it influenced a number of my friends back in that area as well. And let me see, I'm not sure if I'm answering the rest of your question.
No,
that's where it all started.
It's great.
So,
But
Jack,
by the way, one thing I did want to tell you, that back to the high school football, I got injured the opening kickoff of my first game, my senior year. I ended up in the hospital, massive calcium deposit in my leg. The doc said I'd probably never run again. The remedy back then was to let the thing solidify, and eventually, and then they would fillet it out of my leg. And I don't know how I had the wherewithal to say, no way, you're not doing that. So I got lucky. My home family practitioner threw me in the hospital. He wasn't sure what to do. He probably pumped me full of steroids or whatever and dissolved the calcium deposit before it solidified. So I got out of the hospital, a week and a half later, and was still limping around. He said, okay, no contact sports, no this, no that, maybe a little biking, and that's it, no running. But of course, I immediately went back and started playing basketball in the city league and ran track that spring, and the quadriceps, never caused me any problems. I tried to use it actually to fail my military physical when I was a freshman in college. They took x-rays and said, well, there's good news and bad news. The good news is you don't have a calcium deposit. And the bad news is you don't have a calcium deposit. So that's not going to keep you out of the Army, which did end up playing a role, by the way. A little bit further down the line, I'll go ahead and lead right on into this. After my 2 years, I was a walk-on at the University of Arizona after my high school track. I showed up in my Chuck Taylor high-top Converse basketball shoes at D1 school, University of Arizona in Tucson, and introduced myself. I'm Joe Schmo from Pennsylvania. I want to go out for the track team. The coach looked at me. My track times out there were just a dime a dozen. So, he didn't give me anything. He didn't give me any shoes or a locker. He said I could run with the distance runners if I wanted, and that was the extent of it, which I did. I started mid-year, so this is outdoor track season. So I just ran some all-comer track races. Went back home that summer, trained my ears off, because I had learned from the distance runners on that team, really had a much better sense of what it was like to train on a daily basis. So I did, and I came back the next semester. I was a second semester freshman. That year, freshmen were deemed eligible to participate in varsity minor sports, which cross country was. So that was my first cross country season. All of a sudden now the coach needed bodies, so he gave me a locker and shoes and let me run with the team, put me on the team. And at the end of the year, they added up the points, and I was seventh man on the team. So I got a varsity jacket. And, so I'm big man on campus. I had D1 school walking around Arizona at 75 degrees. I'm wearing my big leather jacket. So proud of that. I'm still proud of it. And so I ran a second year, lettered again in cross country, and it was expensive for me for out-of-state tuition, and the coach didn't have any scholarship money that he could give me, even though I was now running with some of the guys on scholarship. So I transferred back east. This was 1969. The year after the Tet Offensive in Vietnam, and we were still very much embroiled. And so the Army was taking every available body, young man who was registered. And I was out of school for 3 months during the transfer process, and I got reclassified during that time. I didn't appeal my classification thinking I'd be in school before anything happened, but lo and behold, I got my draft notice. So it's a longer story than we have time to tell now, but I was able to talk my way into the Coast Guard.
Hey there, everyone. This is Amby Burfoot with Jack Fultz. We had a little technical problem in the taping of the earlier section. We've resolved that. I'm back now with Jack. George Hirsch could not make it, so I'm just going to launch in. Jack, I think it's important that we don't leave people thinking that your best marathon ever was a 2:20 at Boston in 76 when you won. That sounds almost pedestrian, and you were not a pedestrian marathoner. So tell us about 1978, which was quite different.
All right. Well, great to be back with you, Amby. And yeah, 78, it was really pretty ideal conditions. It was in the 50s. We had a little bit of a tailwind, sort of a side tailwind blowing us most of the way home. And, you get conditions like that about once every 10 years at Boston. And then every other year, it's a bit of a compromise. The field was absolutely loaded. We had our 76 Olympic team back, Shorter, Rogers, and Don Cardone. They were all still, in pretty much their best condition. But it turns out Frank was not in great shape for that particular race. He didn't run as well as we knew that he typically did. But again, the conditions were absolutely ideal. I was in the best shape of my life. I trained for 4 months in Eugene, Oregon. I just knew I was really ready to run fast. I think the Boston Globe, runs around and asks everybody on the weekend before the race, hey, how fast are you going to run? How fast are you going to run? Nobody wants to commit. But I was pressed and said, if conditions are right and my stars align, I think I can run, 2:12. And my PR was still 2:20 on paper. It raised some eyebrows. But anyway, so again, the conditions were perfect. Boom, we headed off. By 10 miles, the race had broken into 2 lead packs of somewhere between 6 and 10 runners each. I was in the second pack. We could see the lead pack, and that was Shorter and Rogers and a host of other guys, Asa Tikkanen from Finland, Randy Thomas, myself, Jeff Wells. We were all in the second pack. And then finally through the hills, those 2 packs started spreading out. Guys in the lead pack were dropping back. Some of us in the second pack were starting to move up. And by about the 22-mile mark, I wasn't sure exactly what place I was in. And again, back then, we didn't know where we were vis-a-vis time. We just knew we were flying. And at 22 miles, I think Jeff Wells came up on me. And we were running together. And then he put a move on me. And I couldn't quite counter it. I think I didn't want to go into that last gear to go with him right then. Still 4 miles to go. So I let him go. And immediately thereafter, the press bus came roaring by us and got in between us, went down Chestnut Hill Ave onto Beacon Street. And now we have about a little less than 4 miles to go from that point. And I'm behind the bus and I can't see anything but the bus. And all of Beacon Street for the next 3 miles, it's like what you see in the mountain stages of the Tour de France, right? The spectators are out screaming and yelling. There's no crowd control. It's single file, literally through there. And I'm running behind the bus. And for me, running 12 miles an hour, 5-minute pace, is pretty fast. But for a bus to chug along at that pace, I'm breathing fumes of smoke and exhaust. And finally the bus gets stuck in the crowd. So I literally turned sideways. I'm squeezing between the bus and the spectators all the way. And the bus is still kind of inching along. So it took me maybe 100 yards or something to finally get up to the front of the bus and out in front. So I'm running down Beacon Street again, and within another quarter mile or so, the bus comes up behind me, starts honking the horn. Get out of the way, kid. We got to get up to the leaders. So I moved over to the side. I kept running. He had space to get by me, but another quarter mile, there he is in front of me again, stuck in the crowd. So the same thing happens again. I squeeze between him, literally turn sideways. The spectators are jumping out of the way, yelling at each other, get out of the way. And finally get out in front of the bus again. And now I'm running on down. We're past Coolidge Corner, and I'm still feeling good. I'm flying, and the only way I can see the runners in front of me, the course rolls still, so I could see the lights on the cop car in front of the lead runners. So that's how I knew how far I was behind the leaders. And it wasn't that far, but maybe 200-300 meters or more, 400. And the bus comes up behind me again and starts honking his horn. And I'm like, no way. I'm not moving out of the way this time. I'm not going to get stuck behind you again. So I flip him off. Sports Illustrated did the 10 best flip-offs in sport. I was disappointed I'd never get included in that. But anyway, he was persistent, so I finally had to move out of the way again. And I did. He roared by me. And then I never saw him again until we got to Audubon Circle, which is right near where you go up. We run up over top of the Mass Pike and into Kenmore Square, which is the 1 mile to go mark. And I'm all of a sudden the bus is sitting out there just in the middle of the road. There was no spectators stopping him. I couldn't figure out what he was doing. So I decided to pass him on the right side this time because the road turns to the right through Kenmore Square. And all of a sudden I get right up to his bumper, the big rear bumper, and he starts to move and starts pulling over. It turns out, unbeknownst to me, he's pulling over to the side of the road to let everyone on the bus off the bus. It's loaded with BA officials and some media. And so I'm banging on the side of the bus as I'm running up the little slope, and he's pulling over to the side. He runs me all the way over to the edge of the road by the curb, and finally he stops. And I'm advancing toward the front of the bus, and I think, thank goodness he's stopping, and this is over. And then he opens the door, and it swings right on shoulder to the edge of the bus, and it swings right in front of me. Somehow I pulled one of those old high school moves, twisted, turned, jumped between a National Guardsman was standing there, and he jumped out of the way. Fortunately, I didn't fall down. I land out in front of the bus, and I'm still running, and I look up, and all of a sudden there are 3 guys in front of me, about no more than 50 yards ahead of me that I hadn't seen through this whole incredible ordeal. And I remember somebody yelled to me, "That's third place." And the leader in that group is third place. So I'm like, all right, I got my assignment. I put my head down and took off after them. I caught Randy Thomas and Kevin Ryan through Kenmore Square and was chasing. I didn't know who it was at the time. It turned out to be Asa Tikkanen from Finland. And he was in third place. And I closed, and I caught him on Hereford Street going up. Just about, I could reach out and grab him, and my leg started to buckle. So I had to back off a little bit. I didn't feel any pain. I just, I was like trying to wiggle my ears now. So, and I knew we were flying, but we didn't know what the speed was, what our pace was. So anyway, had to back off. By the time we get up over Boylston Street and made the sharp left down Kenmore or on Ring Road in front of the Heinz Auditorium, we only had 200 meters to go down to the front of the Prudential Tower where the finish line was then. And so I just started throwing my legs out in front of me, chasing after him, and I closed to within I think it was a second at best. I think on paper it says 2 seconds, but I just ran out of race. But there it was, and I didn't know how fast I had run until we ended up way up in the top of the Prue an hour later eating our beef stew, and I'm chatting with Kenny Moore, who was a two-time Olympian for the U.S. and had a 2:11 PR. He was one on the top of the list, and we're standing there chatting. And finally, somebody came in and wrote the word our times on the chalkboard, and it's 2:11:17, and I'm like, whoa! I didn't think I ran that fast. So there it was, and that ended up being my lifetime PR. I always thought I'd run faster. I came back to Boston next year. I moved up here. I was in even better shape until 6 weeks before the race, and I cracked my tibia. Didn't get to run the race that year. Bobby Hodge finished third, a little bit slower than what I had run in 78. So I think I would have been in the hunt had I stayed healthy, but you never know. So, but I was ecstatic to have that 2:11. And interestingly enough, it kind of taught me a little something. The world knows me for having won Boston. Thanks to your question here, more will know that I ran much faster than that. But I personally was as satisfied and felt as accomplished with that 2:11 finishing fourth as I did winning the race. But the world, recognizes the winners, right? And, that old, I'm not sure if I talked a little bit earlier in our conversation about the difference between first and second place. How nobody remembers second place. Nike said, you don't win silver, you lose gold. Vince Lombardi said, winning isn't everything, it's the only thing, although he modified that to the will to win is everything. But anyway, I just had a lot of personal satisfaction with that 2:11. And a lot of people were saying, because it was 2 years since I won and I hadn't run a fast time, 77, I ran the same time as my winning time. And people, the detractors were saying, he won it, but he was the cat that got away with the bird. He can't run a fast one. So there's a lot of personal satisfaction with that one.
Well, Jack, I think not only does 2:11 put you in world-class elite category, but also your description of what the Boston Marathon was like in the 1970s, which George and I both remember, is something a lot of people don't know about now. No fluid stops, no crowd control. As you said, single file through the thickest parts of Beacon and towards the end, and I've never heard a bus story as scary as yours, but all of that was just part and parcel of the marathon back then. So I want to ask next, you were an elite marathoner. What do you think contributed the most to your marathon success? Was it training? Was it some kind of mental or psychological approach? What got you to the top?
Well, it's certainly a combination of that for both. It's the physical and the mental, the psychological. I mean, you remember the Yogi Berraism, 90% of this game is mental, the other half is physical. I love that phrase, and it's so true. But it was the mental part of it that I thought was really the most salient limiting factors to performance. That's what sent me back to school, motivated me to go back to school and study sports psychology and teach it for 27 years at the college level. And but I think it was a little bit of all that. I grew up delivering newspapers every day for 7 years. My dad was a blue collar worker, so I think we cultivated a work ethic that kind of just had me keep showing up. And that's the race goes to those who just kind of keep showing up, so to speak. And you don't want to focus too much through this whole process on the outcome. Stay focused on the process by which, as a matter of fact, there was a great article in the New York Times just last week on Cam Young, who won the Players, the PGA Professional Golf Players, and the Players is the fifth major for those who don't know golf. And he won, and he'd been knocking on the door for a number of years, getting very, very close. And it wasn't until he consulted a sports psychologist he worked with very extensively, who got him to really clarify that notion, the difference between the outcome, focusing on the outcome. All of a sudden you take the lead, you got the lead, and you start thinking of what it's going to be like if you actually win. And now you've taken your mind, your focus off the process by which, and more often than not, that will contaminate your performance. So, so for me, it was a combination of those. I just kind of kept showing up, and I was determined to get as good as I could get. I didn't know how that would actually, what metric would be used to measure that, but I felt that I would know. And going into that 78 race, actually, I started getting a little anxious. I said, I've won this race. There's going to be a lot of expectations on me coming back here again. How am I going to deal with that? And on the occasions through my training, I'd start getting nervous and anxious, thinking, my goodness, what if I don't win, or what if I don't contend the way I think I need to again? And I reverted back to that mindset of just focus on the process. I'm going to be as ready as I can be. I'm going to run smart first and tough second. I'm going to cross the finish line knowing I've taken my last effective steps. I'm not going to beat myself, and then the outcome will just be what it's going to be, first, fifth, whatever. So again, the bus notwithstanding, I don't think I could have run any faster that day.
Well, putting it all together is certainly the game for every marathon runner, I think. You often like to tell jokingly a story in which you claim to be the only person to have finished both first and last in the Boston Marathon. How did you manage to finish last?
Well, yeah, I guess I'm the answer to a trivia question in that regard, right? The only one to finish both first and last. Well, for 8 years, from 88 to 96, I was I worked for the race itself, for the BAA. My title was Elite Athlete Liaison. I got hired the same time Dave McGilvery did as technical director. And when Dave got hired there, his dilemma was, how am I going to keep my string of running the Boston Marathon alive? Because he had run from the time he was 18, or actually, if you know the story, when he was 17, he ran unofficially, and then from 18 up until 88, and he had, 12, 15 consecutive Bostons, and he wanted to keep that string alive. He vowed to himself he was going to run it every year until he couldn't anymore. So he concocted this brilliant idea. He said, hey, after the race is over, my job is done for the day, so I'm just going to go back out to the start and run it on my own, and keep my string alive. So he, and I think a lot of people know the story now. He did that. He did it for 35 years, ran at night. And so I was working with him. We were in the office all the time together in the months leading up to it. So I asked him that year, and after a while, he had built a little bit of a following. He always have some buddies come out and run the race with him that night. And so I asked him in 95, hey, Dave, who's running with you this year? And he said, actually, I got nobody. There's nobody scheduled to run with me. And of course, I was training all along. Because I was working for the race, I didn't have time to actually do the training or run the race that day. I was too busy. But I said, well, if you want some company, I'd be more than happy to run with you. And he said, yeah, please do. So we ran it together. So yeah, and the answer to a trivia question, I finished only runner to finish both first and last. Dave and I worked on the marathon together back in the 90s, and it was 1995. Dave was running the race at night. A lot of people know his story, to keep his string alive. And in 95, I asked him, Dave, who's running with you this year? He usually had some friends. He had no one running with him, so I said, hey, I'll keep you company, and he was happy to have it. So we ran the whole thing together. We come up near the finish line, right on Hereford, left on Boylston, and we're coming close to the finish line, and the local media knew that Dave was doing this. So all of a sudden, there were all these TV lights. It was night. It was dark time. It was 10 o'clock at night. All of a sudden, these TV lights come on. There are a handful of his friends standing there waiting for him. And I thought, no one knew I was running with him. This is his parade. So I just slowed down and to let him run across the finish line, and then I just trundled in behind him. So inadvertently, and I don't know to what degree we were official entrants, but I guess we are, because Dave counts that as just keeps the string alive. So if we were, that inadvertently made me the last place finisher that year. And so now I'm the answer to the trivia question.
I don't think anyone else wants to try and steal that honorific from you. So you should just keep marching it out there. So here's a question that might be important to some other runners. You had to stop running at a certain point in your life around 2000, whether it was hip arthritis or some bad knee surgery that went awry. How did you deal with that emotionally? And it does happen to others. So what do you advise to others who find themselves in that situation?
Yeah, well, it was a hip. I had my hip replaced, the same one twice, and it's fine now. But that's really what ended my racing career, and then my running career pretty much. And so I don't run much at all. I do other things. But I had already been a biker. I had done some triathlons back in the '80s. I had biked across the country, actually on a big fundraising group in '87. I left my full-time job at New Balance to do that. So biking was kind of an integral part of what I was doing now. My running halcyon days were behind me. So it ended up being a much easier transition for me. I hated having to really leave running behind. And I did so reluctantly, but after I got that new hip, it made sense for me to just not run and beat up on that. So despite the complications I had with that, I had biking as a resource, and to this day, I'm a very avid biker. I do fundraising bike rides. I go to Europe. As a matter of fact, it turned on new opportunities for me. I go to Europe on a handful of occasions and bike with my friends over there. We turn it into a nice week-long adventure and vacation. So it's worked out very well. And as I say, to this day, and when the weather's nice, I bike outdoors, and when it's not, I spin indoors. I do other things as well, but you need something else to transition, and it actually behooves, I think, a lot of people who, other than the real professional runners, but even that, Parker Valby, through her high school career, the reports were that in her college career, she did a lot of her training on the Cybex Arc Trainer, which is a very effective elliptical machine to simulate your running motion. I put a lot of my injured runners on that thing, and it's like they don't miss any of their training. If they're willing to kind of put the work in on an indoor machine that they would otherwise be doing outdoors. But to have something, that you can rely on, and the closer it supplements your running, then you can incorporate it and integrate it into your training so you don't have to run as many miles. If I had my whole career to do over again, knowing what I know now, I would do the Parker Valby transition and do a lot of my running on my training on the bike or on the elliptical machine. And so that I could reduce the number of miles that I'm actually pounding myself out on the road. That is the single greatest culprit to staying healthy.
I think that's really good advice there. I actually consider you probably the top coach for training and racing the Boston Marathon course, because you've coached and advised thousands, if not tens of thousands, of Dana Farber runners. And I know you've also got a little sneaky formula or two. So tell us how you advise people to run the Boston course, and particularly how to deal with the up and down hills.
Yeah, well, I have a handful of expressions that have become known as the Jackisms on my team. This is our 37th year with the Dana Farber team. We started in 1990. And I'm often asked, what's the most challenging part of the Boston Marathon course? And interestingly enough, I know that most people expect me to talk about the hills or the very last stretch. And in fact, I think the discipline necessary to keep yourself at the appropriate pace, in other words, slow enough through the first 10 miles, you could argue that the first 10 miles are the most challenging part of the course. Certainly not the most difficult from a physical standpoint, but the discipline necessary to stay as slow as you need. And so the axiom I use for that stretch all the way up through the halfway point in Wellesley is that if you don't feel like you're going too slow, you're going too fast. You literally, if you're running a pace that you can sustain throughout the entire race, run even splits between your two halves, that you're going to be running very hard to sustain that pace at the end, and very easy to run that pace at the beginning. And it works out. I mean, I've run Boston 14 times myself, and I've done it every which way you can. I've dropped out a couple times, finished first and last, and run my PR here. So I've seen it from just about every angle, and my best races played out exactly that way, that I literally felt like I was probably going a little too slow early on. And if you're chasing a time, it's hard to convince yourself to go slow. You're convinced you're giving the course too much time, and you'll never get it back. But you will. Cosmos Ndedi, one of his 3 wins here, he set the course record, and he ran a 3-minute negative split. And there was nobody in front of him slowing him down for the first half. He was still out there racing. So it's the smartest way to run any race course. Boston, because of the downhills as they are, even in Wellesley, before you start running up the hills, you're still at a higher point than you are at the finish line. So even though you have to run up those hills from 16 to 21 miles, it's all downhill from Boston College at the 21-mile mark at the top of Heartbreak Hill. It's all downhill from there. And so, and that 5-mile stretch from 16 to 21, there are 4 hills that measure 600 to 800 meters each. And the rest of that 5 miles is flat and even a little bit of downhill. So you can get over those hills just without doing any damage. You might put a little more effort into them so you don't slow down too much, but you don't put in so much effort that you're not losing any speed at all, because then you're redlining, and it's a very inefficient way, and you're going to burn yourself out. So just get over the hills without doing any real damage. Once you roll over the top of them, kind of catch your breath, get your rhythm back again. And if you've been prudent, or even more so than more conservative than you needed to be, this is where to start whittling away against the clock and get some of that time back on those flat sections from 16 to 21. And then once you get to BC, if you still have some bounce in your legs, and if you're going to run well, you have to still have some bounce in your legs. Otherwise, if you've really trashed yourself going too fast in the first 16 miles downhill, now you're running downhill again, and it's like a spike in your quad every step you take. So, the veteran people who have run Boston before probably know that experience. So again, when in doubt, less is more. Another expression that applies to a lot of various aspects of training and racing itself at Boston. But again, going out slow enough so that you can really even out your pace. That's imperative. Yeah. As a matter of fact, there is a formula to kind of calculate out. It's a rule of thumb as to how much faster you would have run if you crashed and burned and lost 10 minutes, say, over the second half of the race course. Mostly losing time, not because you stopped and hugged your kids or, high-fived all your buddies or had a beer at Boston College or anything like that. You had to wait in the Porta-John line for 5 minutes, but just due to slow down from fatigue and dehydration and all of that. If you lost 10 minutes over the second half, you probably could have saved at least half of that time. So if you want to run your numbers from past years, those veterans who are listening and wondering how to calculate what you need to do this year. So let's say, for example, you lose 10 minutes over the second half of your race at Boston. If you want to run the numbers and see how you could have run that race better, or what you may have been able to run, chances are you were chasing a time that was 10 minutes faster than what you ran. And then you crashed and burned and conclude, well, I guess I thought I was in better shape than that. I need to train harder. When in fact, the time that you lost was because of an imprudent, too fast of a start. And I talk to a lot of runners this way, and they say, no, I felt very good. Everybody feels good in the first 10 miles of the marathon, even if you're running 30 seconds a mile too fast per mile, faster than what you should be running. So maybe you thought you were in better shape. Maybe you didn't realize the heat or the conditions of the day were going to slow you down that much. All those assessments have to be made before you start the race, and apply them right from the very get-go. And the very first mile, Boston's is everybody runs 30 seconds per mile faster than what they're going to end up averaging down that crazy first hill. My advice to anybody is to step over to the side, run over to the side, and let everybody go. You'll pass them all on the hills. So anyway, back to this 10-mile example, cut half of what you lose over the second half, take half of that out, and rerun the numbers of the pace that would have gotten you through the whole race at that adjusted pace time. And you'll see, my goodness, I was running 15 to 20 seconds a mile too fast the first half. And that's huge. The difference between your marathon pace and your half marathon pace is somewhere between 25 and 30 seconds, depending on how, for the 2.5 hour marathoners, it might be closer to just 20 to 25 seconds a mile. For the 4 or 5 hour marathoners, it's 30 seconds a mile. That's not much different. So if you had that kind of variability in your pacing, you're going to run into trouble and struggle over the last part of the race.
Well, I know I have done it many times. I know the vast majority of runners do it every year at Boston. We've studied enough, and we've heard you and others tell us to go out slow, but damn, it is so hard. So I'm going to try doubly hard this year. Jack, we end our podcast with 2 kind of traditional questions. The first of them is about the state of the sport. From your perspective, what is the state of the sport of running? What's good about it, and what could use a little fixing?
Well, from my perspective, there are some parts that are very good. I mean, the number of participants running marathons and even shorter road races, I think across the country and around the world, are at an all-time high. So from that standpoint, it's a very positive thing, I believe, and that's still growing. There are, I think at the end of this year, I saw a prediction that 24,000 runners will have run all 6 marathon majors. That's incredible.
It's
because
amazing.
when this thing was set up back in 2006 or so, the focus was really on the elite runners. They were trying to get more and more of the elites to pursue and stay on the 6 marathon majors. Maybe there was 5 then, and then Tokyo got added, and now there are even more. But the point being, the prize for the first man and first female runner over a 2-year period, collecting points in various marathons, any ones they wanted to run, another world marathon, it was $500,000 for each of them. That prize is now $50,000. So it shows you the emphasis by the organization itself is now focused on the mass of runners who are out there running all these races. It's incredible. And then the charity programs, there are a lot of people who would never think of running a marathon who are now out there doing it. And others who are maybe, if they're not running marathons, they're motivated to get out and just buy some shoes and get out and do some running and work on their fitness and their health. So from that standpoint, I think it's absolutely fabulous. On the other end, on the elite end, we got some major issues going on here. When running went professional back in the early 80s, after President Carter called the boycott, soon thereafter there was open prize money in road racing, marathoning in particular, and it's just grown from there. And then the sponsors started coming in, and more money was coming into the sport. Still is, and everybody benefited from that. Not only the elites who now got to run for open prize money, but there was more money coming into the sport, so greater services could be provided for everybody in the race. So it was one hand washing the other. But the race organization, if you will, the national committees and all these race directors decided to go down the path of buying their talent and paying appearance fees, and they're still doing it to today. But we never, the public doesn't even know this, or those who know it's happening, they don't know how much money is being spent on just appearance fees to bring in the big name athletes. And I felt that right from the very get-go. And there was an organization called ARA, Association of Road Racing Athletes, and Boston was a member of them, that said you can bring in athletes, you can pay their expenses, bring them in and offer them prize money, but no appearance fees, absolutely no appearance fees. And when Boston first went professional in 1986, there was an end run done. They basically created a structure whereby John Hancock was hiring the runners. They weren't paying them to come run; they were paying them as clinicians. Okay, kind of semantics. But it was a novel way of being able to pay athletes to come to Boston. And the other races just made no bones about it. So yeah, we're paying appearance fees, but nobody knows how much they are. If all that money was put in the prize structure, it would be available to more runners. They could pay more and pay more runners and pay more money. And I think it would get more media attention from that standpoint. And the race, the whole sport, I think would have had a different trajectory, and it might look different. Whether there'd be more money in it, more attention being paid to it, who knows? But on another note, of course, we have performance-enhancing drugs, and that is a major issue, and it's a black mark on not just on our sport, on all the endurance sports, and we saw what we saw in professional baseball, in football. I don't have an answer to the solution for that. All I know it's a big problem for our sport.
We're not expecting answers from anyone, not quick and simple ones, but I do appreciate your perspective on appearance fees, which has been a debate forever. It's kind of watered away in recent time, as you have noted, but it's a good one to revisit and consider. Our final question is the 3 fairy godmother wishes, and only 3. It's a little bit more personal. What are you wishing for in the short term or longer term for yourself, those closest to you, the Dana Farber team, the Boston organizers, etc.?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, and everybody should answer these questions for themselves, really, even if it's just to create a bucket list. And I guess I'd have to say, because I've been so involved with the Dana Farber Marathon Challenge team and the cancer hospital that it is for so long, our tagline there is a world without cancer. So if I had a magic wand from the fairy godmother, I'd say, let's have a world without cancer. It's such an insidious disease. It knows no boundaries, no gender, no age boundaries, no race boundaries or whatever. And it affects everybody. Who doesn't know somebody who in their family or their friendship circle who has not been affected by cancer a little or a lot? So a world without cancer, I guess, would be my first one. Given the incessant global conflicts and man's penchant for tribalism, which brings all those on, the idea of world peace, which is pie in the sky, of course, but I would put that as number 2, if you will.
The last person who said that was your friend Don Cardone, so you're in good company there.
All right, yeah, okay, absolutely, and Don, what a great guy. And third, if I get to have a selfish one, it would be to live long enough while maintaining my vitality and health to see the first 2 come true. So, so I would put those 3 at the top of the list.
Thank you so much for sharing those, Jack. And that's it for this week's podcast with our guest, Jack Fultz, who in April is celebrating the 50th anniversary of his Boston Marathon win in 1976. Jack, thanks so much for joining us today, telling us some great stories, recalling the run for the hoses, the lack of crowd control, and buses trying to shove you onto the sidewalk. It was a definite delight to hear from you.
Thanks a million for having me, MB. It was a real pleasure being here. I look forward to seeing you at Boston.
Amby, I was sorry to miss the second part of our chat with our old friend Jack Fultz. So what did you appreciate most about that part of your conversation with Jack?
Well, I enjoyed a little bit of humor. It wasn't significant, but his story about how he's the only runner who has finished both first and last in the Boston Marathon is a really good story and perhaps an even better sports trivia question. I also think Jack's analysis of how to run the Boston course, the pace, the hills, etc., is second to nobody. He always makes really nuanced points. For example, the second half of the course, which has all of those hills, is actually a downhill course. So if you do run smart in the first half, you can really run strong the second half, unlike so many of us who slowed down there. He also points out, as I've heard no one else ever do, that the famous Newton Hills have plenty of flat and even downhill running, while you are indeed climbing your way towards Heartbreak Hill. But still, there are places where you can run relaxed and a little bit faster, and Jack has figured those out, and I give him a lot of credit for his analysis of that course. What did you think of the way Jack talked about running in that 1976 race?
Well, the heat, of course. I think that's the one thing that, if you know anything about Jack Fultz, that's the first thing you think about, the hottest day in the history of the Boston Marathon and his recollections about it, the clock at Hopkinton out at the start with the thermostat that showed a temperature of 116. Of course, that wasn't for real, but the actual starting temperature at the start was 96 degrees. I mean, that's just, mind-blowing. And then what I really took away was Jack's state of mind. He went in with a goal of 2 hours and 20 minutes so he could get the A qualifier for the Olympic trials that year. That was it. He was a better than a 2:20 marathoner, but on a day like this, who was to know? And that was all he was focused on, was time. And he was even thinking, given the heat, if I could get into the top 10 in this race, I'd probably be pretty safe on getting 2:20 or better. And he even made a comment that I liked. He said he made his opponents into his allies. By that he meant that the faster they were running, the faster he was running. So he didn't feel like he was competing against the other athletes up there. They were really helping him toward his goal. And it was only sort of late in the game that his goal changed. He began to realize, all of a sudden he's in fourth place and third place, and he's beginning to realize, my gosh, I could win the Boston Marathon. And Amby, you and I know that the psychology of a brutally hot day in the marathon is completely different than, the mindset for any other marathon. And I really love the way Jack described that situation of his. And he did get the 220, and it wasn't the A standard. It meant he had to pay his own expenses, but he did get to go to the Olympic trials. And so, that was my take.
Well, I think you're totally right about that psychology, George. Jack did spend a lot of years studying in that field and then actually teaching a course or courses at Tufts University. And he brought some very positive psychology to his own running and to his students. So that is it for this week's episode of Running State of the Sport. We hope you enjoyed joining us as much as we enjoyed sharing the time with you. We'll be back again soon with another episode. Until then, please tell your friends about Running State of the Sport. We'd also appreciate a review at your favorite podcast host, like Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts. In signing off, here's our hope for the state of your own personal running. Chin up, clear eyes, full heart, keep moving, onward.